The area would be traveled through footpaths like this one, and we would have to go often through rain because it's a very high area. It gets a tremendous amount of rainfall, which makes it a very rich area. We lived there for a number of months, and then we moved to the foot of this mountain. It is also a volcanic mountain, and you can see the volcanic stones in the foreground there. This is the 5th tallest mountain in Africa, and it's called Mount Meru. I also climbed to the top of this mountain, and it's an inactive volcano, and you can see in the background how the side of the mountain has been blown away. This area is also very rich in volcanic soil and rainfall and a lovely climate, which creates a tremendous area for growing things. They even grow flower seeds, which they export to other countries. The thing that people think about most, I think, when they think of Africa is the wildlife. And I think you can probably guess what that is. No, it's a hippopotamus, and that's how a hippopotamus is most of the time. They stay submerged in the water. That's what you may have thought it was. They're mean creatures, crocodiles, and fortunately this one was on another side of the fence when I took this picture. One of the fascinating and beautiful creatures is the giraffe, the tallest animal in the world. It is an animal that has a skin of about 2 inches thick, and they're very friendly, even the babies. Some people don't come to Africa to see the animals, they come to see the wild birds, because Africa has so many fascinating birds and creatures like that. This is a crown-crested crane in the background, and we have some flamingos in the foreground. What's this? Why, that's a marabou stork. It's a scavenger, and it runs around and picks up the leftovers of other animals. The area has a number of lakes that have been created as a result of the volcano, and it has left a beautiful area. In the background, you can't see it. There's Mount Kilimanjaro. It's hidden in the clouds, which it mostly is because it's so high. If you look closely on the edge of those lakes, you might see there's kind of a pinkish tinge. Do you know what that might be? It's thousands of flamingos that are there on an annual migration. Right beside those lakes is a crater, an extinct crater that has become filled in over the centuries, and it has become its own ecosystem in the bottom of that crater. This crater is called Ingordoto crater, and you can see the dark green rim around it, and the bottom is like a plain. At the bottom, you'll find all sorts of animals. You have warthogs and baboons and antelope living there. And on the edge, you can find the elephant, largest land animal in the world. There are also some interesting small animals. Does anyone know what that is? That's called a scarab, or a dung beetle. It's a fascinating creature. It has a habit, and its custom is to lay its eggs on animal droppings, our dung, which gives it its name, rolls that into a ball about the size of a softball or baseball, and then moves that down a path, rolling it, standing on its front legs, pushing it with its hind legs into a hole, buries it, and then the eggs will germinate and hatch. And you have a lot of little baby dung beetles. Another fascinating thing about Africa are its peoples. The peoples are so varied, so diverse. Africa is a continent that is more than 3 times the size of the United States, has groups that vary in ethnic, racial, linguistic background, so much so that it's very hard to even talk about Africa or even Tanzania. Tanzania alone has over 200 linguistic groups and tribal groups. Africa, we're talking much larger. This group I want to show you is one of the more interesting, called the Maasai. They are a group that have, more than other of the tribes, have held on to their old ways. And the Maasai have their own kinds of houses, their own kinds of foods, their own kind of language, and they're different in that they have not so much modernized. Most of the African people are very Western in their dress and in many of their things. The ladies here are creating a roof for their house with grass. Now, here are some younger girls, and can you tell which one is not the Maasai? The Maasai also have a custom of marrying more than one wife if they can afford it. Wealth is measured by the number of cattle, so if you have a lot of cattle, you should have a lot of wives. This particular man that I'm visiting here had about 6 wives, and his each wife had her own little hut. We had a group picture here before we left, and you can see the man in the center there, besides myself, is wearing a helmet. This was a motorcycle helmet that I used to wear. The boy on the end is wearing a blanket over his shoulder, which is normally what the Maasai men would wear. And it has nothing else besides that blanket, so when the wind blows, they get a lot of fresh air. Let's go further inland into Tanzania and see some of the other sites. Here we have the world's second largest extinct volcanic crater. It's called Ngorongoro Crater. It's 10 miles by 12 miles across. And there is a lake at the bottom. You can see the white lake from all the water washing down the chemicals and alkaline material and creating a very sulfury chemical lake. Down at the bottom, you'll find all sorts of wildlife. Here we have the king of the jungle, which is definitely not the most dangerous animal, is the lion. The lion is not as ferocious as most people think, and these are especially not very ferocious as they just finished lunch. This is considered the most dangerous animal in the world. It is the African Cape buffalo. Of course, this one isn't very dangerous right now, but when it was alive, it was a very aggressive and kind of had a bad temper. The Cape buffalo, you can see with its horns and its very thick skull, would come charging at you, and there's very little you could do as it comes swinging its head. Of course, have the beautiful zebra and the wildebeest. One day I was driving through here with some researchers, and we came across 500,000 wildebeest. Koch's hartebeest, the antelope, and the Thompson's gazelle, very dainty and beautiful creature. Here are also some dainty but not so much beautiful creatures. These are safari or army ants, and one night they visited our home while we were living on the research institute and pretty much took over the place. These are termite hills, and it's interesting. The different termites build different kinds of hills in different parts of the country. What's that? That's a leopard. Leopard is one of the big game animals. It has a unique ability to carry more than its own weight up the tree. And if you look closely, you'll see it has a dead antelope near its tail. And if you can see in the branch below it, it's stained with blood. This picture was taken at dawn, just as the sun came out, and a leopard tends to be a night hunter. There's a cheetah, the fastest land animal in the world. What's this? This is a copy. It's a rock outcropping that you'll find on the Serengeti. It's kind of like a little island on this flat plain. Let's go back and show you how we live so that you won't get the idea that Africa is all wild animals and primitive groups of people. Africa is very developed in many ways. and has much of the same features that you'll find throughout the world. While we lived there, we lived most of the time in this house. It's a house that did have running water, did have electricity. We were surrounded with beautiful trees, flowering bougainvillea, poinsettia. We had many fruit trees, mango, papaya, avocado, lime trees in our yard. It was a very lovely area. Climate was extremely beautiful, and while we were there, we taught at a school, which was just behind our house. Students from the school and from the area have come from many different areas of the world. You have a number of immigrants who have come from India and Asia. You also have a number of groups who have come from different African countries. These are different students and some of the different views that you'll see of Africa. You'll have all sorts of people, all sorts of faces, all sorts of customs and ways of doing things. There's much to learn and to see in Africa, much that we could benefit from in our country. While we were there, we had 2 children, and we had our children named following the African tradition. We didn't give our children a name at birth. We decided to name them 9 days after they were born. So we called together all of our friends. We had about 50 people come from different parts of the world and different groups of Africa, and we chose names for our children. We wanted to choose names that would be reflect some of the qualities that my wife and I believed in. My wife and I are both Baha'is, and we wanted a name that would be spiritually uplifting. And so our first daughter's name is Zia, which means enlightenment of God, and our second daughter's name is Rahima, which means the mercy of God. And so as the sun slowly sets on the Serengeti, we say goodbye to another day in Africa. Hello, I'm Rod Clarken. Today I want to share with you a message entitled The Promise of World Peace. This is a message that was delivered to most of the world's leaders last year. It was delivered to the President of the United States on December 10th at the White House in a ceremony. It's a message that has been addressed to the peoples of the world. It's a message from the Universal House of Justice. It's a message that has a great importance to mankind today. It's a message that has to be heard and has to be responded to if mankind is going to see the 21st century as one united man and one united civilization. World peace is not only possible but inevitable. It's the next stage in the evolution of this planet. Whether peace is to be reached only after unimaginable horrors precipitated by humanity's stubborn clinging to old patterns of behavior, or to be embraced now by an act of consultative will, is the choice before all who inhabit the earth. Among the favorable signs are the steadily growing strength of the steps towards world order taken initially near the beginning of this century in the creation of the League of Nations, succeeded by the more broadly based United Nations organization. The winds of despair, Baha'u'llah wrote, are at last blowing from every direction, and the strife that divides and afflicts the human race is daily increasing. So much have aggression and conflict come to characterize our social and economic and religious systems that many have succumbed to the view that such behavior is intrinsic to human nature and therefore ineradicable. The evidence reveals that such conduct, far from expressing man's true self, represents a distortion of the human spirit. The current world confusion, the calamitous conditions of world affairs, is a natural phase in an organic process, leading ultimately and irresistibly to the unification of the human race in a single social order, whose boundaries are those of the planet. The human race, as distinct organic unit, has passed through evolutionary stages, analogous to the stages of infancy and childhood in the lives of its individual members, and is now in the culminating period of its turbulent adolescence, approaching its long-awaited coming of age. A candid acknowledgement that prejudice, war, and exploitation have been the expression of immature stages in a vast historical process, and that the human race is today experiencing the unavoidable tumult which marks its collective coming of age, is not a reason for despair, but a prerequisite to undertaking the stupendous enterprise of building a peaceful world. That such an enterprise is possible, that the necessary constructive forces do exist, that unifying social structures can be erected, is the theme we urge you to examine. Whatever suffering and turmoil the years immediately ahead may hold, however dark the immediate circumstances, humanity can confront this supreme trial with confidence in its ultimate outcome. Banning nuclear weapons, prohibiting the use of poison gases, or outlawing germ warfare will not remove the root causes of war. However important such practical measures obviously are as elements in the peace process, they are themselves too superficial to exert an enduring influence. A few such issues, because of their immediate relevance to establishing world peace, deserve additional comment. Racism, one of the most baneful and persistent evils, is a major barrier to peace. Racism retards the unfoldment of the boundless potentialities of its victims, corrupts its perpetrators, and blights human progress. Recognition of the oneness of mankind, implemented by appropriate legal measures, must be universally upheld if this problem is to be overcome. The inordinate disparity between rich and poor, a source of acute suffering, keeps the world in a state of instability, virtually on the brink of war. The solution calls for the combined application of spiritual, moral, and practical approaches. A fresh look at the problem is required, entailing the consultation with experts from a wide spectrum of disciplines, devoid of economic and ideological polemics, and involving the people directly affected in the decisions that must urgently be made. Unbridled nationalism, as distinguished from a sane and legitimate patriotism, must give way to a wider loyalty to the love of humanity as a whole. Baha'u'llah's statement is, "The earth is one country, and mankind its citizens." The concept of world citizenship is a direct result of the contraction of the world into a single neighborhood. Religious strife throughout history has been the cause of innumerable wars and conflicts, a major blight to progress, and increasingly abhorrent to the peoples of all faiths and no faith. Followers of all religions must be willing to face the basic questions which this strife raises and to arrive at clear answers. The challenge facing religious leaders and mankind is to, with hearts filled with the spirit of compassion and a desire for truth, to eliminate the plight of humanity, to ask themselves whether they cannot, in humility before their almighty Creator, submerge their theological differences in a great spirit of mutual forbearance that will enable them to work together for the advancement of human understanding and peace. The emancipation of women, the achievement of full equality between the sexes, is one of the most important, though less acknowledged, prerequisites of peace. The denial of such equality perpetrates an injustice against one half of the world's population and promotes in men harmful attitudes and habits that are carried from the family to the workplace, to political life, and ultimately to international relations. Only as women are welcome into full partnership in all fields of human endeavor will the moral and psychological climate be created in which international peace can emerge. The cause of universal education, which has already enlisted in its service an army of dedicated people from every faith and nation, deserves the utmost support that the governments of the world can lend it. For ignorance is indisputably the principal reason for the decline and fall of peoples and the perpetration of prejudice. No nation can achieve success unless education is accorded all its citizens. A fundamental lack of communication between peoples seriously undermines efforts towards world peace. Adopting an international auxiliary language would go far into resolving this problem and necessitates the most urgent attention. 2 points bear emphasizing in all these issues. One is that the abolition of war is not simply a matter of signing treaties and protocols. It is a complex task requiring a new level of commitment to resolving issues not customarily associated with the pursuit of peace. The other point is that the primary challenge in dealing with issues of peace is to raise the context to the level of principle, as distinct from pure pragmatism. For in essence, peace stems from an inner state supported by a spiritual or moral attitude, and it is chiefly in evoking this attitude that the possibility of enduring solutions can be found. World order can be founded only on the unshakable consciousness of the oneness of mankind, a spiritual truth which all the human sciences confirm. Anthropology, physiology, psychology recognize only one human species, albeit infinitely varied in its secondary aspects of life. Recognition of this truth requires abandonment of prejudice of every kind: race, class, color, creed, nation, sex, degree of material civilization, everything which enables people to consider themselves superior to others. The experience of the Baha'i community may be seen as an example of this enlarging unity. This is a community of some 3 to 4 million people drawn from many nations, cultures, classes, and creeds, engaged in a wide range of activities serving the spiritual, social, and economic needs of the people of many lands. Its existence is yet another convincing proof of the practicality of its founder's vision of a united world, another evidence that humanity can live as one global society, equal to whatever challenges its coming of age may entail. The promise of world peace. World peace is not only possible, but inevitable. It is the next stage in the evolution of this planet. Whether peace is to be reached only after unimaginable horrors precipitated by humanity's stubborn clinging to old patterns of behavior, or is to be embraced now by an act of consultative will, is the choice before all who inhabit the earth. Among the favorable signs are the steadily growing strength of the steps towards world order, taken initially near the beginning of this century in the creation of the League of Nations, succeeded by the more broadly based United Nations organization. The scientific and technological advances occurring in this unusually blessed century portend a great surge forward in the social evolution of the planet, and indicate the means by which the practical problems of humanity may be solved. Yet barriers persist. Doubts, misconceptions, prejudices, suspicions, and narrow self-interest beset nations and peoples in their relations to one another. The winds of despair, Baha'u'llah wrote, are alas blowing from every direction, and the strife that divides and afflicts the human race is daily increasing. The signs of impending convulsions and chaos can now be discerned, inasmuch as the prevailing order appears to be lamentably defective. The Baha'i Faith regards the current world confusion and calamitous condition in human affairs as a natural phase in an organic process, leading ultimately and irresistibly to the unification of the human race in a single social order whose boundaries are those of the planet. The human race as a distinct organic unit has passed through the evolutionary stages analogous to the stages of infancy and childhood in the lives of its individual members, and is now in the culminating period of its turbulent adolescence, approaching its long-awaited coming of age. A candid acknowledgement that prejudice, war, and exploitation have been the expression of immature stages in a vast historical process, and that the human race is today experiencing the unavoidable tumult which marks its collective coming of age, is not a reason for despair, but a prerequisite to undertaking the stupendous enterprise of building a peaceful world. That such an enterprise is possible, that the necessary constructive forces do exist, that unifying social structures can be erected, is the theme we urge you to examine. Whatever suffering and turmoil the years immediately ahead may hold, however dark the immediate circumstances, the Baha'i community believes that humanity can confront this supreme trial with confidence in its ultimate outcome. Banning nuclear weapons, prohibiting the use of poison gas, or outlawing germ warfare will not remove the root causes of war. However important such practical measures obviously are as elements in the peace process, they are in themselves too superficial to exert an enduring influence. A few issues, because of their immediate relevance to establishing world peace, deserve additional comment. Racism, one of the most baneful and persistent evils, is a major barrier to peace. Racism retards the unfoldment of the boundless potentialities of its victims, corrupts its perpetrators, and blights human progress. Recognition of the oneness of mankind, implemented by appropriate legal measures, must be universally upheld if this problem is to be overcome. The inordinate disparity between rich and poor, a source of acute suffering, keeps the world in a state of instability, virtually on the brink of war. The solution calls for the combined application of spiritual, moral, and practical approaches. It is an issue that is bound up not only in the necessity for eliminating extremes of wealth and poverty, but also with those spiritual verities, the understanding of which can produce a new universal attitude.